Joining me now from Geneva to discuss this humanitarian crisis is Leonard Doyle. He is the spokesman for the International Organization for Migration. Leonard, welcome to the show. We just saw those harrowing pictures there of people telling us of the challenges that they face as they try to cross the ocean, try to seek a better life in Europe. We saw pictures of dead bodies, people who don't make it at all. Put this crisis in some context for us. I mean, we know that 3,000 people have already lost their lives trying to make it to Europe. Is it going to get worse?
Well, probably not that much for the rest of the year. Boats tend to journey across the Mediterranean when the seas are relatively quiet. That is during the summer months, which is just coming to an end now. So we anticipate that this is probably the end for Europe. But of course, other parts of the world, people are still trying to make this journey in Asia and in the Caribbean in particular.
And the people who are trying to make it to Europe, these migrants, where do they come from mainly, and what are they running away from?
Well, it's a mixed bag, and it depends very much on the push factor. So the largest numbers have been from Eritrea, where there's a lot of repression. But of course, given the conflict in Syria, in Iraq, given the recent conflict in Palestine, the recent tragedy, the 500 who died off Malta, many, if not the majority of those, were Palestinians who had left the occupied territories and left Gaza, rather, after they'd received some money for rehousing and then used it to try and get into Europe to meet their family for the most part.
So we have people who were deliberately murdered, really, on the high seas by smugglers. What kind of efforts are being made to prevent this happening? I mean, how can they be protected?
It's a difficult one because it happens in international waters, and these people are from states which are very much fragile states, if not falling apart altogether. So what country is going to stand over them? It's clear that if these people were citizens of a well-to-do country, the reaction would probably be completely different. So what can be done? Well, one thing we're trying to do at International Organization for Migration is to focus international opinion on this really shocking state of affairs, in which people, if only to improve the conditions of their families, to leave oppression, to seek a better financial situation for their families in collapsed economies, are really trying to do a good thing, and they end up being exploited, and in this case, as we've seen, actually murdered, but it appears, by criminal gangs.
A number of people are making it to Italy in the South Mediterranean. Do we know how many people are making it there? What about other countries? It seems that Europe does not have a common policy when it comes to these migrants. Different countries have different policies.
Well, there's a common policy, and some are refugees, and they get, where they appeal for asylum, they obviously get offered asylum. But about over 100,000 have been counted landing this year in Italy alone. What we're hoping to do is get a better count, but the European Union has obviously, if somebody lands in Italy and they end up there, another European country, doesn't have the burden that Italy has, and the Italians have also put a lot of time and effort and money into trying to save lives at sea. There's undoubtedly a burden-sharing problem, largely due to geography. And I think there's certainly pressure from the Italian presidency of the European Union to bring some equity to that. But just at the end of the day, just pulling people out of the water isn't the solution. Obviously, something has to happen from the sending side, whether it's cracking down on the criminals who are exploiting these people, or bringing some better solutions to the countries that are at war. Syria is one. The Palestinian situation is another. Egypt has its own people jumping on the boats for financial reasons, it seems. And, of course, Libya is in a bad way.
I want to ask you about cracking down on the smugglers themselves. Is anything being done about that? Because we had this case, as you mentioned, as we had in our report as well, about this boat being deliberately rammed off Malta, 500 people losing their lives. I mean, will the people responsible for this ever be brought to justice?
Well, one certainly hopes they will. One questions how it's going to happen. These are shadowy figures who use social media, Facebook, what have you, it seems, to attract customers. And they're willing customers who want to pay money to get to a better place. It turns out that they then exploit their clients, if you will, and turn into traffickers, and in this case seem to have rammed the vessel and sent it to the bottom of the ocean in a particularly callous and heinous crime. They should be prosecuted. We certainly are calling for it. We need to see a bit more action because, these people are human beings. They come from families that are only trying to do better by themselves, and they deserve the same force of the law as anybody else has.
Italy has set up something of an emergency operation. That operation has now been taken over by the European Union, and the EU strategy, as far as I understand it, is just to beef up security at border posts. What kind of impact is that having?
The EU strategy is more than that. The European Union spends a lot of effort in trying to improve the situation in the sending countries. It has a European foreign policy, it has international humanitarian aid, and it helps support these governments across the board. And we in IOM often work with the European Union in these cases. So it's not just a question of putting up the barrier on one side. But obviously there is a difficulty in the politics of European Union members, because due to the media to some extent, but due really to unscrupulous politicians, I think, as well, the question of the migrant has been turned into a political whipping boy. And so a politician who calls for perhaps more reasoned policies, more managed migration, is a politician who may not get elected. Because in the popular opinion, this is seen as supporting somebody who's taking a job away from somebody local. Whereas, in fact, we know that migrants contribute greatly to the growth of an economy. One only has to look at the United States, which is a country of immigrants, to see how this happens.
And in Europe, of course, we're also hearing a lot of criticism from far-right and right-wing groups. And these groups are saying, look, what you're doing here is you're rewarding people who are coming here illegally, encouraging more of them to arrive here.
There's a lot of misinformation around. The numbers of migrants who appear in Europe is actually relatively small given the population. The number of people who are resettled here from around the world is infinitely smaller than those who are resettled, for example, in the United States. So I think what we're seeing is a magnification of a problem out of all proportion by unscrupulous politicians. And they really, should be ashamed of themselves in the way they treat migrants. Migrants are the backbone of a modern society. They bring cultural diversity. They bring innovation. The leaders of some of the top companies in the world are migrants, or the children of migrants. For one, the creator of Facebook is the son of migrants. So, I mean, the idea that migrants are a problem is frankly nonsense.
Leonard Doyle, we're going to have to leave it there, sir. Thanks for joining us.